Yeah, especially the. It's sort of the sense.
Yeah, you can do that. Not good. That's the wrong. That's.
Maybe I'll start closer to the end here. Talk a little bit about the next two classes. What I wanted to focus on is the stories or the visions that politicians tell and how people relate to that. For this class, we're going to be starting in the 1970s, and we're going to look at the ones that were predominant then. And then in the next class, we're going to look at the ones that are out there today and where people are going with them, and how you can put those together in a campaign and come up with ideas and so on for people's campaigns or what we think would work. So that's sort of just to give you an overall plan. Today we're going to start with, as I said, with the 70s. Molly Worthen said charisma is a kind of storytelling. A charismatic leader invites followers into a narrative about what their lives mean. Now, this is something that politicians try to do. It's often referred to as vision, coming up with a vision or something. George H.W. Bush was frustrated by that. He said, what's his vision? Oh, that's that vision thing. I'm supposed to have a vision. You know, his vision was to just manage the government well and not cause trouble, I think, which wasn't that inspiring, but it got him elected once. So that's what we're looking at. Often we adopt these as young people when we're just becoming active, like Peyton's age, beginning to think about the world, and we're looking at the world at that time. Sometimes that vision carries us through. So we'll find that people in our generation are still thinking in terms of the thoughts that they had back when they were in their 20s or even late teens. Sometimes not. Sometimes people change, and that's something we can look at. When we were young, the world was different. We were worried about the nuclear holocaust. People don't worry about that much anymore, although I think the risk of nuclear war is probably just as high now as it was then, although it probably wouldn't be massive war between the two superpowers. It'd be something like the Iranians blowing off a bomb in Tel Aviv or the Pakistanis or something. But we're not focused on that. At that time, the world was split between the free world and the communist world and what we called the third world. Black people were sort of marginalized and not too much part of the mainstream political process, not at all like they are today, or Chicanos, as we call them then. Mostly we talk about Hispanics and immigrants. Chicanos are more like native-born people of Hispanic origin. Women were just beginning to question their roles that they've been cast into. You had the feminist movement coming out. You had humanistic psychology, motivational kinds of things that were popular. I went to a big humanistic psychology conference in Atlantic City. It was quite a wild event. It was all nude swimming and all sorts of stuff you didn't have elsewhere. But before Atlantic City got casinos, it was all run down old hotels that we could afford. So that's a different time, and you can remember that. Let's just review some of that, and then we can personalize it. In the book, they start with the 1960s Democratic Convention, which is a little early for me. I couldn't vote until 64. I don't remember if I paid too much attention to the 60s convention. Probably all of you are younger than me or not much older, so you may have been not paying too much attention. We're looking at three characters here: Adlai Stevenson, John F. Kennedy, Michael entered the waiting room. I am in a waiting room now. I didn't know I'd set it for a waiting room. If you see that thing come up and I don't notice it, let me know that somebody's in the waiting room. Stevenson was considered more charismatic, which I wouldn't have thought of. I always thought of John F. Kennedy as being very charismatic. I think that he became more charismatic once he was elected. And in his inauguration speech, and then he had the dramatic confrontation with Khrushchev and so on. I don't know that he was thought so much that way in 1960. Nixon, as Molly said last time, really had no charisma. And yet he did pretty well, just following on Ike. Ike had charisma. Eisenhower had great charisma based on being a great general and having won World War II and invaded Europe, and also just the style that he had. So that was the campaign then. Maybe we'll look a little bit at the convention, just a reminder what it was like. Are you guys getting sound, by the way? Okay, this is a clip of the 1960s convention. I'm going to move on a bit. The sound gets better up around 55, I think I said. Just isn't too far. Now, if you look closely at this, see if you can see any black people. I don't think I spotted any, not very many certainly. That you realize that if you went to a Democratic convention today, you would see a lot more, both on the podium and in the audience. The conventions at that time were actually meaningful in the sense that they picked the candidate. You didn't know who was going to be the candidate. A lot of the delegates were free to vote how they wanted before we had all the primaries. So it's a period of a lot of enthusiasm. Why was there so much enthusiasm for Adlai Stevenson? Some of you said you remembered Adlai Stevenson. How many of you have an opinion of Adlai Stevenson from memory? Anybody? I know my father's friend, I remember my father's friend saying he was voting for him in 56, but I wasn't paying much attention.
I remember
One way,
seeing him.
yeah.
I remember seeing him when he was.
Did you feel he was a charismatic person at the time?
I never thought of him as. I mean, I didn't really know very much about him. I didn't pay much attention to politics, but I remember seeing him on television. And I remember seeing him after the election that Kennedy won, and he was appointed to the UN. And that's when Khrushchev was pounding his shoe on the table, and Adlai Stevenson was there, and a bunch of very famous jazz musicians interrupted the General Assembly. And there's a movie about that called Soundtrack to a Revolution, or something like that. It's a very interesting about what was happening back then.
Well, having researched it a bit, I can tell you his slogan was, "Let's talk sense to the American people." That's one way you can get at the vision, is the slogans are their key statements. He was referred to as the man who thinks. He was a thinking man. He didn't call himself that, but that's what people referred to him. His vision: America stands at the edge of a catastrophe in a nuclear age driven by fear and mass irrationality. The path forward is not emotional mobilization, but calm intelligence, moral seriousness, and global cooperation. The Cold War is dangerous, not just because of communism, but because of fear, ignorance, mass uprisings. People remember the Hitler episode of the World War II, and were fearful of how masses of public would react. It was much more recent then. He wanted followers to think critically, resist demagoguery, and trust expertise and international institutions. The problem with that is that it doesn't give you much to do except wait for him to solve problems. The story is not intellectually it's intellectually satisfying, but emotionally thin. Now, if you look at Kennedy, his slogan was the new frontier. Of course, we've always had a frontier, a new frontier. It doesn't sound very original, but it caught on. People related to it. Let's get the country moving again. Once again, the country is in a decisive moment. He was concerned about the war, nuclear war, and so on. That he had the missile gap. We didn't have enough missiles to deter the Russians and so on. But he stressed a new generation has been called to meet global challenges, space, communism, to prove the vitality of freedom. The Cold War is a test of national will and destiny, not just geopolitical. So he was trying to inspire people that there's something you can do. You can serve your country. You can join a national mission, Peace Corps, the space race, that your personal actions were going to matter. He was trying to inspire people. It was the youth thing is often a strong theme for politicians. So that's where he was. Richard Nixon, the world is dangerous, but we've been handling it well. Eisenhower did a great job, and I'm his follower. Vote for me, and we will be able to handle things, avoiding risky change. Change is risky. Seasoned leadership is more secure and reassuring. That's what he said. Now, as a result, he just about paired with Kennedy when it came to the election. Kennedy won the nomination rather closely, and largely because he had support from Democratic machines and so on. Stevenson had run twice before, so he'd lost twice to Eisenhower. Probably anybody would have lost to Eisenhower, so that wasn't necessarily held against it. So that was pretty evenly divided on that idea of youth versus change. On the other hand, the policy differences are minor. If you really look at Stevenson, Kennedy, and Nixon, what they were going to do was not very different. And when Nixon got into power, he did change. He went to China and reversed our whole policy. He was open to guaranteed annual income to replace welfare. He was actually just as open to innovation as Kennedy or Stevenson seemed to be in practice. If you look at the actual policy differences, they're small. And I think that's not true if you look at, say, Trump versus any of the Democratic candidates. It makes a difference which one we got. The world changed because we got Trump rather than any of the Democrats that would have run. So there are real policy differences that I don't really see that much there. It's a matter of the style that people relate to more than the policy. There probably are policy differences, but they're subtle, and they're not things that people would have thought of immediately. If you look at the slogans, you can see that. Here you see Kennedy's slogan is the new frontier. Kennedy for courage. That's somebody holding a sign. Nixon is your kind of an American. And maybe yes, maybe no, but a lot of people thought he was. Here, this is a scene of the debate. Apparently, he didn't shave properly before, and he had the shadow, and he didn't look too good. Kennedy was better looking and younger, and that sort of helped him a bit. He had a more attractive wife. I mean, things like that where people were looking at, not major differences. Stevenson was labeled an egghead. I guess some of us are probably eggheads. So we can sympathize with that. What is an egghead? A person of spurious intellectual pretensions, a professor, a protege of a professor, a superficial, overly emotional and feminine, a self-conscious prig. That's an egghead. And point of fact, Stevenson was not an intellectual. He was not a professor. He didn't have his only degree was a law degree, which they all had law degrees. I mean, he was the governor of Illinois. That was his claim to experience. It wasn't really that, but he talked that way. There's a quote here of one of his speeches, and you can see he uses big words. The victory to be won, this portal to the golden age mocks the pretensions of individual acumen and ingenuity. It's a citadel guarded by the thick walls of ignorance. It looks sort of pretentious and too many big words. He did not have a great speech writer. And he actually wrote a lot of his own speeches. And he didn't use a teleprompter. He didn't like the teleprompter because he was always changing his speech a little bit before the time. So he would read it from a script. And he read it reasonably well. It wasn't bad, but he didn't look you in the eye the way they can pretend to do when they're reading it off the teleprompter. That's the teleprompter. You can pretend to be looking at people. Here we have, I think I have a clip of him. Now, here's a couple of signs. Vote for Stevenson. He's a lousy golfer. Now, that's sort of pretentious. Somebody who plays golf rather than reading books. I guess Eisenhower played a lot of golf. A lot of presidents seem to play a lot of golf. Tired of teenagers. I don't know what that refers to. I saw that in the clip. Stevenson was older. He wasn't a teenager, certainly. I don't know. If anybody have an idea what that might have referred to?
Might have referred to Kennedy being very young at the time.
Kennedy, but he wasn't that young. Certainly wasn't a teenager.
But he might have been called a teenager by people who didn't like him.
Maybe you say Kennedy's too young. I know Reagan turned that around on, who was it he was debating? He said, I won't hold your youth and experience against you in a debate when he was in his 70s, which was considered too old then. As you saw with Mrs. Roosevelt, she said, can't think of me for president, I'm 73, which was sort of the norm then. It's that presidents should be more in their 50s or 60s, but not just down to your 30s. Kennedy was maybe a little on the young side. It could be that's what it refers to. I don't know. Stevenson was told that he had the support of thinking people. And he said, that's not enough. I need a majority. Which probably was true, I guess. Here's a clip of him speaking. This is from 56. I'm just going to pick any random spot here.
Now, I suppose we should be thankful that they have fought up with the New Deal as I. But what have they done to take advantage of the great opportunities of peace time? A generation after the New Deal. Well, I say they have covered us in smiles and success from our social and our economic advantage.
I don't think he's that bad, but he got he didn't win. He wasn't he did not get the nomination. They wanted somebody different. That makes sense. Tired of teenagers. Get Nixon. We looked at that already. All right, I'm going to take a break from showing you my screen. I see Michael Ireland has joined us, or has he left? Is he still there? He signed on. Maybe he's not there anymore. I wanted to get him to share something that he had written, but doesn't look like he's there anymore. So it's only 3 people on there. Nobody on there except the people that are here. All right, we won't do that then. If he comes back, if you see him come back, let me know to call on him. I mentioned that the black people were a separate sort of part of society at that time. And we could look at the black leadership who had an influence on the evolution of society later. So in terms of our era and so on, it's a big period. I'm going back a little bit further. You see a lot of different styles in the Black community too. This was William Seymour, who was a holiness Pentecostal preacher. Now, an awful lot of the leaders of the Black community were religious leaders. Being a preacher, being a pastor was one of the professions that you could go into as a Black person. And if you were sort of inclined towards reading intellectual topics or whatever, there were limited opportunities. And he was a really very successful, and he was successful in integrating the races into his church, which was a sort of a storefront type church in Los Angeles that took off on a tremendous level. A lot of white people came, white women came. And it was sort of considered a scandal that the white people were there listening to a Black preacher and preaching with the Black people. But he was inspiring across the line. He learned from a white evangelist. When he went to theology school, they wouldn't let him in the room, but they would let him sit outside the door and listen. So it was sort of like segregation, was accepted at that time. And the Black people were not supposed to just come in and sit down with the white people, but they were supposed to pick up the ideology. He used speaking in tongues, as we talked about later, the ability to speak in a foreign language he'd never studied as proof of revelation. This movement was a big movement. It took off around the world. The big group in South Africa of the same group. Marcus Garvey and a different approach. This is what we think of as more like we call Black power or nationalism. He was a nationalist leader. He believed that Black people didn't need white people and they should just develop their own thing and develop their own businesses and maybe go back to Africa. And there is a whole group that went back to Liberia, and they're still there. It's still a English-speaking colony of people who were descended from people who left from the United States. He got along well with the Ku Klux Klan because he said, they can do white people, I'll do Black people. We have our two things, and they don't need to get together. That was his philosophy. He should be proud of being Black. He also saw himself as a sort of charismatic leader like Mussolini or somebody. He loved to go into parades and wear fancy uniforms, sort of like military uniforms. He proclaimed himself to be the provisional president of Africa. Not of the Black Africans, but of the Africa that's over on another continent where he'd never been. But they were Black people and they were all colonized. There were no Black presidents of African countries at the time. So he would take over and liberate Africa. He got into a lot of problems with the businesses he started. He had like a steamship company, and the ship broke down and he lost money and he got arrested for financial problems. So he had a lot of problems of that sort. But he inspired a great many people. This was a very inspiring sort of group. We can get his speech here, not a picture, just a thought.
I have to thank you for the wisdom you have given me on this planet Earth, the United States of America. I have been absent from this country for 9 months. Away to the West and Central America, traveling to the center of the movement I represent.
Okay, that's probably enough of that. I see Michael is back. Michael, are you hearing me? Let's see your picture. You sent me a thing about you were interested in artificial intelligence and whether it can be charismatic. Was that right?
Well, I sent you a story that illustrated how some followers on social media could be
persuaded by artificial intelligence.
Get the closed captions going. Did he say yes or no? What did he say? I think that's an interesting topic, and that's one I wanted to deal with probably next time. I disagree with Molly. She says she doesn't think an AI can be charismatic. I think they will be. She is a historian and a journalist, not a futurist. But if you look at the future of technology, I think the AIs are getting to the point where they can be more creative and more putting something novel together, which she didn't think they could do. I also think that if they have to be personified, or it helps a great deal. My son's AI company, they have a robot, is now a citizen of Saudi Arabia. People really will relate to an AI if it comes from a body with a face, even though the software was really crude and they're not very impressive at all. They can relate to that. So I think when an AI gets a body and comes out, that will help. Even if it's an avatar, it'll help. I could show that next time if you're interested, or maybe even get him to come on. I've had him come to classes before, but that's I just wanted to highlight that topic because it's something that I do want to pick up on. Okay, that's just as I would have brought that up at the beginning when we're talking about next week, but he wasn't signed on. He signed off his video again, apparently. Okay, let me now try to get back to screen share. Let's share. Is that AI? Is that the one I want to share? I think so. Yes, okay. All right. Now, also in the Black community, you had experts. And these are two that are well known. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a sociologist, he did a lot of really good sociological work on the Black community, a book on the Philadelphia Negro and so on. Now, he went to Harvard. He grew up in Massachusetts, so he was sort of being accepted by an elite in Massachusetts. He saw Black people being integrated with white people and pushed for the creation of the NAACP, along with a lot of other people. And then there was Booker T. Washington, who was born a slave in the South. So he had a different life history. And he was more towards the Garvey thing of, we don't need white people. What we got to do is develop our skills, develop our businesses, improve the strength of the Black community. It's not that he didn't want to be with white people. He just didn't see pragmatically that was going to happen. And it probably wasn't going to happen where he was in Alabama at that time. It could have happened in Massachusetts. So and both of these people, I think, played a very constructive role. Booker T. Washington got educated, worked himself through college, started the Tuskegee Institute, became the leader of that, started the Negro Business League, and that threatened the white supremacists too. As we saw in Tulsa, you have a riot, they want to burn down the Black businesses. They don't want Black people to have successful businesses. So it's not exactly accommodationist. I'm more sympathetic to him, but I think both of these leaders were very effective and began to build up movements that had an influence on a part of society. Then we had Martin Luther King, who we all know. How many people have heard his I Have a Dream speech? How many people were there in person? I'm the only one, I guess. I was there. I went to the march. And we were back in the end, and we were just bullshitting and talking and not paying attention to what the speakers were saying. So I must admit I missed the whole thing, although I was physically there. We just thought, oh, this is a big rally, and there's all these boring speeches, and who wants to listen to those? The sound wasn't that great. I've listened to it since on recording, but I really didn't hear it, although I was physically present. Many of you probably heard it on recording. I don't know if you watched it live at the time when he was giving it or not, but probably if you were watching TV, you would have gotten better sound and a better vision of it than I got way in the back of a huge crowd. So nevertheless, it certainly was an inspiring moment. You can see that he combined the religious with the political in terms of the nonviolence, the emphasis on Christianity. Although he was not really, he was a very liberal Christian. He would have been a Unitarian if he had thought he could have been influential in the Black community. He thought to be a leader in the Black community, you can't be a Unitarian. You have to be like a Baptist or something. But he didn't believe in the literal, Christ literally came back from the dead or any of this sort of literal stuff. And I would say that his philosophy is very Gandhian, very Hindu in a sense, as well, influenced by that as well as by Christianity. I think he had a good grasp on Christianity as well. He was extremely charismatic to people, I think, as an orator, as well as his message, his personal history of being locked up in jail. He wrote the letter from the Montgomery jail or Birmingham jail, Birmingham, Alabama. That was really something that caught people. There were other types of leaders in the Black community. Angela Davis, that she talks about in the book, who was a Marxist scholar and really was into communism. There was others, Stokely Carmichael, who's the one on the right there. He was in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they changed it to the National Committee and turned it to Black Power. It didn't want white people coming down. I remember I went down for the Montgomery March too, and we met those people. They were very doubtful that they wanted white people. They knew they needed us to come, but they really didn't like having us there either. It was, you could see there was a ambivalence there, that the white people drew them immediate attention and made it less likely that they'd get killed. But it also, they wanted the Black strength. Eldridge Cleaver was a popular author of the book Soul on Ice. Anybody read Soul on Ice? Everybody I knew read that. He was in jail for raping a white woman, which he admitted he did. He felt bad about it because he felt he shouldn't have been after white women. That was his main objective. He was in jail. They put up, men in jail will put up pin-up pictures of women. And he noticed the Black men were putting up pin-up pictures of white women. And, there were pictures available of attractive Black women they could have put up. And he felt that they should be doing that. There were all these different tendencies in the Black community, as there are in the white community. You can't say that the Black people are the same. Here we can see Angela Davis.
I see that the greatest revolutionary potential exists among Black and brown people.
Some brothers and sisters don't understand your concept of communism. They don't understand, they cannot, let's say, reconcile Blackness and communism. What is your philosophy in that respect?
I feel that the reason why racism is so blatant and it's been a part of the history of Black people from the time we were first kidnapped from the shores of Africa is because it has helped those capitalists gain more and more profit. If you look at any factory, any plant, who does the worst job? Who gets paid the smallest salaries? It's Black people. So racism serves as a buttress, as a justification for super exploitation. And I feel that if we're going to talk about the total liberation.
Well, she was really into Marxism as a theory and working with Herbert Marcuse, who we're coming up shortly, and got a tenured position, I guess, University of California, but then some Black activists were caught in an action with a gun, and it turned out that she had bought the gun and was registered to her, and she lost her position and went underground. So it's a long history there. Certainly inspiring to some people. We saw the growth of the Chicano movement, there were all these separate movements that emerged in the 60s. And the Chicano movement had one charismatic predominant figure, which was Cesar Chavez, who was really more into leading a social movement nationally than he was into the nitty-gritty work of organizing a labor union, which was what he was doing, was a farm workers union, trying to organize people who were picking grapes. We had the national grape boycott. Anybody here remember boycotting grapes? It wasn't, it was a pretty widespread movement. He was elevated as a heroic figure. There's all kinds of murals around. There's a story in the Times yesterday about the artists are going in and painting over him in the mural, and some of them think you should leave it there as an historical statement and so on, because of his history of abusing girls and women, and having raped his partner Dolores Huerta, who didn't report that at the time. She didn't want to compromise thought he was more important as a symbol of the movement, and continued to support him. She's still alive. She still talks about it. So that's one thing, that women tend to live longer. That's why we get more women in our courses here too. So she's still around. He's gone. Okay, another movement that is sort of on a different level is what Molly was talking about last time, what she calls New Thought. Sometimes it's a new age, but that's part of it. A loosely organized spiritual movement teaching that the mind shapes reality, emphasizing positive thinking. That's one book, The Power of Positive Thinking. That was a preacher, I think, Norman Vincent Peale. There's another one, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a good book. I guess it sort of works. The way you win friends and influence people is you listen to them and look them in the eye, and you give them positive feedback. And that happens so seldom in our everyday life that anybody who does that can make any number of friends very quickly. And there are politicians who do that. That's what the politicians call retail politics. The politicians divide their work into retail and wholesale. And retail is when you're working with people face to face. Wholesale is when you're on the media. That's when we get to AI, it's going to be able to do retail politics on a mass level. And that's going to be a change. And technically that could be done now. You know, a politician cannot carry on personal conversations with 100,000 people at once, but an AI can do that. You know, it can have any number of icons or avatars or whatever, and it can listen and respond and have an exchange, and an exchange that, if you looked at the transcript, would be the same as you would get from a human. Even today, the LLMs that we have now, the large language models, are doing that. So I do see that as the future of leadership and so on, is incorporating that technology. My son and I are writing a book on that. Really, I'm helping him, but I'm sort of giving it on the AGI Nation. So we will. I have a lot of interest in that. This New Age thought or New Thought involves figures like Oprah Winfrey, who popularized the law of attraction. People like Donald Trump. And that's where you see them both being what she calls gurus, in that they are into this idea that you can change the world by your attitude and your feeling and your opinion. If you want something to happen, you make it happen, and it'll happen. And sometimes that works. You know, you want to go get Nicolas Maduro, you decide you're going to go get him, and you send down people, but then it doesn't work when you go to Iran. You know, often these things don't work, but that's what they sort of have in common. And Trump uses that style of New Age thought, where your feelings and your impressions, your gut feelings, are what shapes the world and what changes things. This was expanded into politics by some of the people discussed in the book we have, Marianne Williamson. It fosters charismatic authority rooted in personal experience. The gurus inspire followers by promising empowerment, healing, and success through changes in belief, mindset, consciousness, rather than institutional doctrine or rather than a policy. Now, sometimes that's beginning to backfire, and I'm not sure where that's going. Like Trump said he was going to bring prices down the day after he was inaugurated. How is he going to do that? It turns out he has absolutely no economic policy in mind to do that. It's not like he had one that was wrong. He had no idea what he was going to do to bring down prices. It was sort of like, if I want to bring down prices, I'll tell prices to go down and they'll go down. I think that's sort of the level that is attractive to people. If you want to make a lot of money, convince yourself you're going to make a lot of money, and you convince other people to lend you money, and you can invest it and you end up making a lot of money. It works for preachers. I went to a church in Camden where I used to work. A preacher was saying, do you want to make $100,000 next year? Well, you've got to give a tithe to the church of 10%. So give the tithe now in advance. If you tithe $10,000 to the church, then God will make sure your income goes up to $100,000. That's that making that commitment. Who knows? Maybe somebody gives $10,000 to the church, and by the next year their income is up to $100,000. But maybe not. Maybe they get laid off and they're on welfare. They wish they still had the money. But that's a mindset that's out there. And this was a major movement in this period of time. This was a guy named Hal Lindsey who wrote The Late Great Planet Earth. Anybody here read The Late Great Planet Earth? People have seen that. Quite a few people read that. I think it had like 20 million sales, tremendous sales. Now, one of the other things that this incorporates is the projection of a revolutionary change of some kind. If you want the world to change and it's not changing, well, it's going to change. Now, in Marxism, it's going to change. There'll be a revolution and the proletariat will rise up because of a contradiction in the economy. In religion, it's like God is going to come back and he's going to end the world and reward the religious people and punish the evil. And it's going to happen pretty soon. That's what he predicted, that the apocalypse or end of time was imminent. Faith in Jesus will bring the kind of serenity that the humanistic psychologists had promised, the Jesus People movement. Catherine Kuhlman, the national face of charismatic renewal, and evangelical movement, True Faith. These are big movements. There's a book about them, God's Generals, the Greatest Power in the World. These are big selling books. They're not necessarily directly active in politics at this time. They're more changing the person. Later on, they began to say, well, you should also get into politics. And that happened more in recent times than at this period of history. Hal Lindsey taught that the biblical prophecy was unfolding in modern events. I don't know how many of you have read these books of the Bible, Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation, but it shows a period where there'll be tremendous strife and conflict and disorder in the world, and there'll be this period of tribulation for 7 years, and then the rapture will happen when the true believers will be taken up to heaven. Christ will return. I think the people who wrote that in the Bible, they were expecting it to happen in their lifetime. They weren't expecting it to happen 2,000 years later. But it's been saying, well, maybe that's what they were referring to as a prediction for now. It's been going on now for 2,000 years, and there's still, I was on the mailing list for the group that That is, they believe all the conflict and turmoil and everything in the world today is a sign that we've entered into this period of tribulation, and they're predicting when it's going to happen. Now this, however, he was doing in 1980, and it clearly hasn't happened. So what does that mean? There's an interview with him. I just asked him about that.
Our 10,000 Reasons flashbacks today takes us to August 19th, 1980, and program number 826. That's going back a ways. Hal Lindsey was the guest, whose runaway bestseller, The Late Great Planet Earth, had piqued the interest of countless people, believers and non-believers, who became intrigued with Bible prophecy in the light of current world headlines. He told of what sparked the writing of the book.
After 8 years with Campus Crusade for Christ, traveling all over the country in many parts of the world, speaking on this subject, I was urged by people to write a book. You know, they would say, give us a book on this subject, and we'd like to read more. And so I would recommend the current books, and then come back and say, well, you interpret them for us, we can't understand. So that's how I got interested in writing. How many copies has Late Great Planet Earth sold? It's over 18 million now, and it's in 31 languages. That is, by the way, that is something that is a sign of the times. Only God can do something like that. It's not that it's such a great book or so well written, but it's that the information in it, I believe, is so important that God has blessed it. The New York Times designated that the bestseller of the decade, which, you know, when you take a book on Bible prophecy and if God does something like that, that's a sign of the times.
And that decade was the decade of the 70s.
So it didn't happen. There are other people who predicted that this is a NASA engineer, retired Edward Wisenaught. He published 88 reasons why the rapture will be in 1988. This sold 4.5 million copies, so it was a very popular. And he came down to a date. That's very dangerous when you make predictions to actually give it a time, because that it won't happen. He said here, only if the Bible is in error am I wrong. And I say to every preacher in town, if there were a king in this country and I could gamble with my life, I would stake my life on Rosh Hashanah 88. That's when he predicted on his analysis of the Bible that this was going to happen. That's why you see 11, 12, 13. That's the date of a Jewish holiday. He thinks the Bible predicted that's going to happen in 1988. Despite having been written maybe 3,000 years ago. Some of these books are older than Christ. But it didn't happen. He wrote additional books. He had different dates. Gradually, people lost interest in his books because it kept not happening. But there were new ones came out. This is a billboard. Judgment Day, May 21st, 2011. The Bible guarantees it. Now, I guess what puzzles me is why more people are not discouraged by the fact that these things don't happen. You know, when you predict something and it doesn't happen, well, maybe it'll happen next time or something. It's like you want to believe it more than you want it to actually happen or something. So that is part of the culture of this time, but it continues. And there are still groups that are anticipating that this is the end of times, and they know that it's failed many, many times in the past. You guys are not dumb. And they know that Jesus predicted it would happen during the lifetime of the people that he was talking to. They realize all of that, but they think this time it's really going to happen. This is really what's going on. So that goes on. Here's another part of the culture of this period. A Course in Miracles, scribed by Helen Schumann, teaches that the world we perceive is an illusion shaped by the ego's fear and separation. Reality is spiritual and unified In love, salvation comes through a shift in perception guided by the Holy Spirit. Forgiveness is the key practice, correcting misperceptions. So it's another idea that it will happen. It'll be a miracle. It happens because we believe in it. And the reality of what you think is reality is actually the illusion. And the reality is really your vision. And that's another book that has been very successful. So it reaches a need that people have. The Guru Maharaji, he's now changed his name to something else, which I don't remember. He claims power over all illnesses and problems affecting humanity, resembles a prophet and agitator in criticizing the wisdom and fuels of traditional institutions. But his basic thing is that you meditate and you believe in it, and that will make it happen. You will change your situation by changing your internal psychology. It's mostly meditation, which people still do. Mindfulness meditation, it's helpful and gets your blood pressure down and so on. And there's limits probably to what you can do with it. It's similar to the some of the humanistic psychologies and things like that try to get to change your mind to change the world. You change your mind first, and then the world will change, rather than changing the world. So you can have a more peaceful existence. Now, this tends to attract maybe a different generation of younger people. Some of the other things maybe not quite so much, but a lot of people go into these things for a period of time. Usually they cycle in and out. People don't get hooked into it for long term. A certain number of people do. See, I have a video here apparently. This is just not the chocolates.
To large audiences. He was born to Paramahansa Gurudev Sri Hanji Maharaj, the perfect incarnation of his time, regarded then as the Lord by millions. When Paramahansa Gurudev Sri Hanji Maharaj left his mortal body, in spite of 3 elder sons, he chose the youngest and commanded him to carry out the mission of peace in this world by revealing the perfect knowledge within inside each human heart. Large audiences, Guru Maharaji declared that if anybody comes to him with a sincere desire and a guileless heart to receive the knowledge of eternal perfectness, he would give them what they desire.
It's on YouTube. I don't know why I didn't implant it. Link out to it. Yeah, back into this mode. This gradually declined, I guess, because people got tired of it. It's not new. He went back to India. He's still around. He's still alive. There are still people following him, but not too many. Okay, here we have some who get into the business world, more a matter of what you might call motivational speakers. Galway's book, The Inner Game of Tennis. Now, he was very closely paralleled the Guru, although he was not a member of the Guru's movement exactly. He didn't copy it, but it's sort of like the inner concentration that you have to play a good game of tennis is the same as the sort of meditation that the Guru was doing. And it's the same that you need to be a success in business. appeals to the self-improvement idea that has always been popular with Americans, maybe more than people in other countries. I don't know. There's another one, Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence. You can be saved. Opposed to the numerative rationalist approach to management, exemplified by Robert McNamara, which is another charismatic figure that we can look at. People seek meaning in their lives. They can get it at work, control their lives as well as fold themselves into a bigger, more exciting narrative. And there are business consultants who offered these sorts of workshops to sharpen your sensitivity training, often led by women. And it's not that women have a natural inclination to be better at this than men. Many people think that, and that it was a opportunity for women to become business consultants, as opposed to the kind of consultant that has a spreadsheet and does a statistical analysis and so on. In the business schools, you take courses in both. Executive presence, which is the synonym for charisma, is what people try to develop. You get people to follow you by being charismatic, which has to do with offering them a vision and listening to them, talking to them. You can do it on both the retail and the wholesale level. That seems to be a part of what Oprah was about. Humanistic psychology is a related movement. Within psychology, you have like behavioral psychology and Freudian psychology. You have different schools of thought. The humanists sort of believe that people can guide their own development and follow their own needs and get to better understanding themselves. Gestalt is a thing you can look at the totality of the world. We have a psychologist here. I don't know if you're a behaviorist, I guess. You said you did experimental psychology, so it's a different kind of psychology. I don't know if you study this sort of stuff. This is the pyramid of needs. How many people have heard of this before? It's very, very popular, very well known. And it's sort of like common sense. You know, you have physiological needs. If you can't eat, you have nothing to eat, you're going to starve to death. You're not going to get to the higher level. Then you have to be safe, love and belonging, esteem. And finally, once you meet all of these, you get up to self-actualization, maybe even go to spiritual actualization, then add another one up there. If you read the article, it's actually more insightful than you would think, just looking at a simple chart like that. But most people just see it in the chart. And so the goal is self-actualization that does not require religion. You don't have to need Jesus. You just need to work on yourself and follow your instincts and sort of get clearness. I guess Quakers, we call it clearness, which is sort of a similar concept, but in a religious dimension. Now, there has been reactions against these things. This is a book, The Culture of Narcissism. People who were into these things for a while and say, well, that's kind of self-oriented and self-indulgent, and people are narcissistic, which means they worship themselves. They think they're more beautiful than you are. And we always saw this with Trump, who's known as extremely narcissistic. Actually, the studies show that being a little narcissistic is a good thing. So it's not bad to think you're a little smarter or better looking than you are. But if you get to the point where you think you're Jesus Christ and you're going to change, you can change the world with a hunch, it causes trouble. And that we discussed that already in the context of Trump. So you have a backlash against these things. There's some other writers that are mentioned here that criticize these teachings. Now, if somebody has a serious mental illness, it's probably not going to work. It's fine, probably good for healthy people. It's not good for people who are dealing with schizophrenia or something. And here we have the experts. And this is Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara was appointed by John F. Kennedy. He was the Secretary of Defense, and he was a big on systems analysis and computer analysis of the war. And he had all kinds of statistics in the Vietnam War about how many of the enemy were being killed versus how many we were being killed. And you project these trends out, you see the enemy are all going to be dead pretty soon and we will have won. It turns out it didn't work. And that was frustrating, but people became disillusioned by it. The other experts you see here are totally different. That's here Peter Marcuse, who was a Marxist philosopher, and he wrote what was the name of his book? I had it. Get it here. Can't remember. One-Dimensional Man said Western society only appeared rational and free. It was irrational and repressive. The basic thing that he was trying to explain is why the working class didn't believe in Marxism and didn't rise up. And it was like the system was manipulating our consciousness. It's what he called repressive tolerance. They tolerate you and lets you do whatever you want because they totally ignore you and they don't care what you think. They're not going to throw you in jail like they do in Cuba or something. You can believe whatever you want, and maybe you can even get a job in university preaching it, although that's harder today. But it's not taken seriously. He thinks that so it ties into this idea of the consciousness being important, but it's being manipulated by the power structure. It's not something that people can really control. The other one I put up here is Noam Chomsky. You've probably heard of him. He's a distinguished linguist. So he has a specialty, but he also writes all these sort of conspiracy theory type books about how the United States and Israel are evil forces in the world. It's odd because his father was a rabbi and he comes from a very Jewish background, and he's rebelling against Judaism or Zionism, which you can get go into a psychoanalytic analysis of that. I see we're getting close to the break time. I'm going to skip ahead here to, I think I have, yeah. This is picking up on McNamara. I should have put this here. In terms of reconsidering.
If Everton was cautionary tale, it is that of Robert McNamara, the best and the brightest of John F. Kennedy's New Frontier.
I've asked to Robert McNamara to assume the responsibilities of Secretary of Defense.
He became the architect of the Vietnam War, which America set out to stop the countries of Southeast Asia from falling like dominoes to communism, only to find out we were wrong. We didn't have our history. We didn't have our culture. He told that to President Johnson, and from then on tried to at least limit the killing. I want to emphasize you really failed. And that failure is why I'm so thankful. The older he got, the more clearly he saw his mistakes. Well, you know, they say you with hindsight. But you don't have hindsight available at the time. There are many among those who fought in Vietnam and the families of the 58,000 dead who can never forgive McNamara. But give him this. By the end of his extraordinary life, he had owned up to his mistakes. David Martin, CBS News, the Vatican.
And that is fairly unusual that people actually rescind their beliefs and switch. There are some other people who have done that. I don't know, Jack Milberg in this class? Probably not.
Here.
He's interested in Lyndon LaRouche. Anybody here remember Lyndon LaRouche? He was a perennial presidential candidate. He started out as a Marxist, as a Trotskyist from the 40s to the 60s. In the 1970s, he gave up on Marxism, started on conspiracy theories, industrial development, a strong nationalism. He spent 5 years in jail for fraud. I don't know. I suppose he was actually guilty. From the 1980s on, he said he went from red to red, white, and blue. He sort of switched from one extreme to the other and became an avid right-wing nationalist, carrying a lot of his followers with him. They were more followers of LaRouche than they were followers of any particular ideology that he had. But he changed their views. They were a nasty group in some ways. They attacked other left-wing groups. They broke into Communist Party meetings with clubs and assaulted people. You know, they weren't just talking. So he was mostly, as is often the case, you don't go out and attack the people who are opposite from you. It's the narcissism of petty differences. It's the people who are almost like you that you somehow get more upset about and attack. That happens a lot. A lot of other people, I think I have some others here of people who changed their views. There are people who changed their views about communism and socialism, the God that failed. Now that's from an earlier period of history, really more a reaction to Stalin and the idea that it's not that the revolution didn't come, it's that it came and then the result was bad rather than good. And that's where they turned a series of essays. They are looking at communism as being like a god in the sense that it was an ideal vision of the future that was going to happen and sort of go to utopia. Rather than going to heaven, you create utopia in Russia. Whittaker Chambers, he really switched and went from left to right. A lot of them went more from left to middle of the road liberal rather than far right. But they made changes in their ideology, which is, I think, something that is admirable, as you saw with that little clip on McNamara, giving him the credit for saying, well, we had all this data, we had all this information, and it didn't work, and it was wrong, and he's trying to discuss why it's wrong. This is much later when he was like our age, writing a book about it and so on. So that's something I wanted to do with our group. I brought a sheet here. We can have a break, and I'd like you to try to fill out this form. We're in the 60s, 70s. First question I'm asking here is, what leaders or groups inspired you in your teens or 20s? It could be a politician, an activist, a philosophy. Now, I didn't get to some of the other groups here, like the feminists, which I wanted to get to, but that was it. There's not one that I had on the screen here. Whatever it is, that's fine. I'm glad to get something different. And then, what was the vision or the story that the leaders that they were offering? And have you changed? So there's 3 questions. What was the vision that inspired you? You can get together and work on these. I think it's a good idea to share these with other people. But I'm not going to try to sort people into groups. You're welcome to do that if you like. And then we can talk about I'll share mine too. I have it there on a slide, but I'm not going to do that before you do your. See, Michael is still there. Do you have a copy of this form? Michael, do you have any? My screen is still up. I don't know if he's here. You're the only one on Zoom. I can't make you.
I don't see the form that you're talking about.
It is there in the mailing I sent out a week ago. Basically, there's three questions. What was the group or leader that inspired you when you were young, when you were in your 20s, let's say? What was the vision that they offered? And what do you think of it now? Have you followed the same vision, or have you changed? Have you found it necessary to change? So you could try to answer those questions.
My chat function is not working at all.
Chat.
I didn't have any gurus or anybody that I followed when I was a child. I did not have a close relationship with my father, and did not identify with male authority figures. In fact, I was rebellious against authority, and really didn't have anybody that I admired.
What was your father's politics?
My father was a Republican.
There's the idea that younger people rebel and turn to the opposite. Most people don't. Most people do follow along with their parents, but maybe a more pure version of it. Become more Republican than a Republican, or did you become less so? What happened to you over the years?
Well, when I graduated from college, I got a job with the government, which had a Republican governor at the time. So I registered as Republican in order to get the job. And I stayed Republican for 12 years, although I was never a dedicated one. And I changed over to be a Democrat in response to Ronald Reagan firing air traffic controllers. I got a job with the federal government, and again, did not admire the authority leaders of my job. So I joined a union and became an organizer of it.
That's right.
And when
Yeah, I know.
and fired the air traffic controller. Sent me off, and I became a Democrat. And, dedicated union advocate.
So people I call you, so.
So who's ready to share their conclusions on it?
My case, freaking so long, between three now. Statute, it's the, sorry, you know, it's precious. Yes, I was years. And I just, what's the wrong name? Yeah.
They don't go on.
Some of it.
They're close and
Yes, it's so. Oh, well, you know what we're talking about, are you gonna say now? We could think of two classes. I am, just, I just, it's not because I saw some pretty people, like I was like, looking at testing down person, I think somebody was full of bullshit. Right, and there's the, you know, it's simple, I just, it's like. I mean, I like JFK, I thought he was smooth, he's incredible, and so, and spirit, yeah, the collapse. That's, yes, nice, but my parents were very, Elizabeth. And so the Democrats were always put down as a house. And I grew up in a town where Adlai Stevenson lived on the same road as my parents. In Illinois, yeah, St. Mary's Road. Okay. Yeah, I
There was a Republican.
no, it is.
How about you folks? Have you got somebody?
I feel the same. I never felt that strong. I figure I always suspect. It's a suspect. Because you do go. I was never on fire or any person.
The challenge I have for you folks, but next week, come up with what somebody can do against her each day.
But fortunately, Mary, Roberts.
I was with the. Christian and the Lutheran Church, part a big fan of Albert Schweitzer, so I went to be a missionary. And but then I was afraid to be a missionary because I had stories about what happened. And so I decided, well, maybe realistic. But and about that same time, I stopped believing in Christianity, so it turned out to be not so important. So I did change my mind about that.
You got.
I think the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement.
Civil rights movement.
Yeah, yes.
Nobody else found saying Martin Luther King inspiring for example?
Well, Martin Luther King, but even after.
Maybe they're not inspired by it.
That was when I got in my 20s. That was the big thing. It was the civil rights movement. Fairness, the whole idea of fairness.
Exactly. I was gonna say Jimmy Carter. Yeah.
When he was president or post-president?
Both.
Both. A lot of people have been very impressed by his post-president.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he lived the Christian life, which few of us do.
About his presidency.
Well, I thought it was completely honest, as long as they stand up to both parties.
The part of your own.
No, as far as he wasn't really popular in the Democratic Party. He stood up and since he were. I was young then, I can't say I followed it. Give you an honest answer.
I liked it that he wore a sweater and said we could turn down our.
Well, then he drove 55. He would have to tell the country to drive 55 again.
And that was just the subtle undertone.
That's exactly. I admire.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know why I thought it was good.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to.
Well, somebody.
That's all.
And had major complaints on me last.
Somebody.
Final decision makers every.
No, I say it's.
I read a lot.
Maybe
Read
it's
a
not
lot.
what it's now.
Out west on this.
That was the first word.
Yeah, I think so.
But he might like.
For what had happened.
Somebody going to be inspired by.
That's right. He was like,
Well,
well,
and because he was a 16-hour a day at the office guy too, which George Bush was too.
Yeah, what I'm getting from a lot of people here is that they were not that inspired by any charismatic leader, which I think is common. There are a lot of people who are. It's not particularly surprising.
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah, if ever there was a cautionary tale, it was that of Robert McNamara.
right, I'm not manipulating it, I'm watching myself.
I never heard it. But so
Of course, at this time, the very existence of the is not the way that this should
right out here.
Thus, he said,
He said, my book, now the whole his book, I learned pretty lot of truth.
Oh, you're right.
I don't seem to be able to manipulate my screen, I'm just watching myself.
Seem to be in 1980s, many of them no longer considered by the times. What exactly the internal that was just a big show.
Well,
I've got
associated birds. So,
like take say the way the Bolsheviks, Lenin and Trotsky.
What? I'm not able to go from screen to screen. Wow.
You understand why?
They was there, there's. There's the word was still, we were gonna, we were. When Randy were given, I got a picture of my wife with a snowball, saying, summer ball, when Randy, they got with.
And these are the mothers that I didn't quite get to, so I'll give a break. This is charismatic feminist leaders. I know some of the women here in the class would have been inspired by them. Yes, people are having a good talk. What do you ladies think of the feminist leaders? Did you not find any of them inspiring? Gloria Steinem. She was like a Playboy model, Playboy. She was centerfold, or she worked for Playboy or as a waitress or something, and created Biz Magazine. Betty Friedan, the author of The Feminine Mystique. Now, she was a rather dry social scientist. That book is a very boring book, really. It's written in sort of like social science language. The publisher thought it would sell 3,000 copies if they were lucky, and it took off to be a bestseller. Basically, what she said is housewives are bored with being housewives, particularly if they've been educated and gone to college and so on. I met her once at a social gathering on Long Island. She's a very disagreeable person. It was really unpleasant. And she was being very unpleasant. The young women that came up to her and, oh, I've always admired your work forever. And she was like, oh, what the hell do you know about my work? Just a nasty person. Her husband was extremely supportive and supported her to work on this book for years and was totally in sympathy with feminism. So she divorced him anyway. But she was psychological. I was there with some women I know who were psychoanalysts, and they were observing that she was really, very irritated and problematic. Steinem, on the other, some of the other feminist leaders have written about they had psychological issues and so on. Not Gloria Steinem. She was very successful and dated a lot of prestigious men and so on. Bella Abzug was a forceful, electrifying speaker. She brought the feminist movement into established politics. So they are important leaders that had a important role in shaping this society. Here we have the gay rights movement. Now, who is the charismatic figure who kicked off the gay rights movement? Irving Mills. If you can't think of one, that's because there wasn't one.
There wasn't.
And this was kicked off totally as a spontaneous mass movement. And it started with this Stonewall uprising on June 28, 1969. The Stonewall was a gay bar in New York. And the nature of the gay population, the gay men, is that they tend to have large concentrations in certain cities, such as New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco. So there was a large mass of them. And the police were harassing them and broken up, and they just got fed up with it, and they started fighting back at the police. And it became like, you could call it a riot or an uprising or a revolution. It was a spontaneous reaction to a police raid. And basically, you could say it fits into this philosophy that you can make the world what you want if you decide to do it, but they weren't going to do it as a group. They happened to all be together, and because they were at the bar, and they formed then a pride march, gay pride. The idea of pride seems to be very important, because the idea that being gay is a sin and you should be ashamed of being gay. which is a big part of a lot of religious ideology. The idea that as it is in the Bible, a man who lies with a man as he with a woman, with a man as he would with a woman, should be put to death. I mean, there is that in the Bible, and people believe that, but they said, no, we are proud of ourselves. We're going to come out in public and march. And it really took off as there was a cultural change. I think it was Ellen DeGeneres on TV, who was identified as a lesbian and was a person that people liked and liked to watch and so on. There was gradual sort of cultural change. Politically, the first really prominent gay person was Harvey Milk, who was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. And he was a very popular figure in San Francisco in the gay community, but I think also beyond just the gay community. The consequence, he ended up getting assassinated, not in 1078, that's a typo, in 1978, by a co-worker, somebody who was also on the Board of Supervisors. Whether it was really anti-gay or just a personal thing or whatever is debated. Now we have Pete Buttigieg, who was running for Democratic nomination for president, who's gay, but he's not running on the gay ticket as part of the general movement. Now, each of these movements have started out as a separate sort of thing with the gay, and then you got into the people who change their sex, go to getting what they call that now.
Transgender.
Okay. And this became the LGBTQ, and they joined together as an interest group. But it was not really inspired by any charismatic leader. It was a sort of just a spontaneous uprising. This is where I was in the I don't know exactly when, 1970s. I think you could probably guess which one is me on the right there. We're selling copies of the Radical Sociology Journal. That's my friend Al Szymanski. He was an adamant pro-Soviet. He liked the Soviet Union. He was pro-communist, and he was extremely bright and accomplished as a scholar. I was always sort of on the margins of Marxism and sort of halfway there. But we got along well anyway. He was a very close friend of mine at the time. He ended up committing suicide after I left Oregon. It wasn't my fault. I moved to New Jersey by then. But whether he was so disillusioned by the failure of the movement or it was something else, it's really hard to say. He was seeing a psychiatrist. He got to the point where he felt he couldn't teach his classes anymore. He shot himself. He had bought a gun to be ready for the revolution, handgun, and so it was handy, and he used it on his own skull, which was kind of disappointing. Sue there, that's his wife. She then went back to school and became a psychologist and is teaching psychology now out in Oklahoma, or at least was a few years from now. This is a book he wrote, The Soviet Union Socialists or Social Imperialists, a debate between two people. It's all debates within a small group on the left. In terms of Marxism as a theory, now who do you see here? Do you see anybody you can recognize?
It's Jay. Jesus, can you give me something about it?
Buddy?
Hey.
Who is this young lady right here? That's Jane Fonda. Okay, I think somebody said. The other person here is Tom Hayden over on the left, who was at that time her husband. He was probably the figure in the 60s that I was most inspired by. He was active in a group called Students for a Democratic Society. They wrote a manifesto called the Port Huron Statement, which is just because it was formulated in a labor camp in the city of Port Huron, Michigan, talking about participatory democracy, which I thought was inspiring. Jane got turned on to politics to a certain extent by her association with Tom, but it was part of the anti-war movement. At that time, the opposition to the war in Vietnam was a very powerful thing, and motivated by the fact that people didn't want to go to Vietnam and get killed or kill people, but also by the feeling that it was wrong that we were against it. Now I had been raised as a Quaker pacifist, so I was against war in general, and there were people who thought the other side was the right side and should win. That's like Al was more, they sympathized with the Viet Cong and the people who were against the United States, and you formulated a whole anti imperialist ideology. Jane Fonda ended up going to Hanoi and meeting with people and getting on the radio, and she went pretty far to that side. Then she broke up with Tom Hayden, and who did she marry after that? It was a prominent business, wealthy. She likes powerful, accomplished men. I think her politics is still on the left, but she is more into health and exercise, but I don't think she's ever gotten into the Make America Healthy movement. I see her every morning because I do a workout, a tape of Jane. It's exercises for senior citizens, which she did. And she was, now I'm 10 years older than she was when she did it. I don't know if she can keep it up. She is still alive though at work. She's 5 years older than me, and she's still up and about. Noam Chomsky is still alive too, but he had a stroke, can't talk, can't communicate. He's in pretty bad shape now. Tom Hayden is if I had to pick a person that I found as inspiring, was Tom Hayden. And he was elected to the legislature in California. He went back to California, and he was in the state senate and the state legislature. He did not succeed in getting elected to the U.S. Senate or the Congress. All right, we talked about Lyndon LaRouche, God that failed. Did that already.
If ever.
Mid-70s, many people.
Here we have Herbert Marcuse.
Marx did not concern himself very much with the individual, and he didn't have to, because at his time the very existence of the proletariat made this class a potentially revolutionary class. Now things have changed considerably since. The question is to what extent can the present working class in the advanced industrial countries still be called?
He was like, that was one of those books that everybody had been referred to, but almost nobody actually read. It's very readable. But they knew that his basic philosophy was that the workers had been deceived by capitalist propaganda, and therefore couldn't win an election. You had to seize power by force. Noam Chomsky is defending Marx here. I'm not going to bother playing that one, I don't think. Coming to the end here, we're talking about narrative visions. And on the left, we see the narrative visions that we sort of talked about today, or that were predominant in the 1970s. First of all, there was the idea of the free world versus communism. And pretty much all the powerful leaders accepted that view, that the world was divided between the good and the bad, and we were the good, and we had to defend ourselves from the bad. There were people who flipped it around and defended the other side, like my friend Al Szymanski and some of these other people. And they became disillusioned, I think, with the fall of communism. The fall of communism was disillusioning to some people. Most people were inspired by it and thought it was a good thing, but there are people on both sides. I once went to a meeting in New York. There was a guy that his whole career had been studying East Germany, and East Germany disappeared. Your whole object of study is gone, doesn't exist anymore. He was mourning for the death of the German Democratic Republic and went through the stages of mourning and all the stuff people are supposed to go through about it. Very few people mourned the loss of communism. In fact, it's gone. Then you had the civil rights, the Black Power, anti-war, anti-imperialism. That's the people who were against the United States. Then you had the feminist movement, gay rights, and the new thought that we talked about, which is positive thinking, humanistic psychology, charismatic Christianity, people who believe that the rapture is coming and so on. I don't think we can carry those over to the current time. This is my attempt to come up with a set of visions that are persuasive today, one of which is the restoration vision, the idea that we need to go back to the way things were, that the world has gotten bad and it's been corrupted by one thing or another, by the radical left, by the immigrants, by the Arab who corrupted it is wrong. And Make America Great Again is the obvious symbol for that movement. The opposite to that is sort of the fairness movement. The idea that the world is unequal and that you have to improve the rights of people who are oppressed, who are the victims. This is where you get the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's denounced as the woke. And that's what Molly Worthen said was really the problem with the left forces, or the progressive left of center liberal forces, is that they focused in on the DEI and that people don't really want that. Not even Black people, majority of them are not happy with the affirmative action. Another movement that you have is the national identity movement, which is the Christian nationalists, isolationists, anti-immigrants. It's overlapped to some extent, but this is an idea of America as a cultural area. It's not just a place geographically where people came from all over the world and formed a new nation based on an ideal. There's the idea that America is a country that's based on an ideal. It's not based on your language or your race, as opposed to, say, Sweden or Denmark or Germany. You know, you're German because your people have always been German. You speak German. It's a cultural thing. We have birthright citizenship, and Germany does not have that. You know, you're German if you're culturally German. Then there's the technological abundance movement, and this is something that is growing now, and this is one that I would support, and I want to talk about more next time. That's my son would like to be a leader of this. He's fairly charismatic. He has a lot of followers within the sort of progressive artificial intelligence movement. And then moral renewal. This is where we get Tabarico that we talked about. I think Obama fitted into that. Those are themes that I see out there. We have a few minutes. I think I have a clip here. This is from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., How I See the State of Our Union.
I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm running as an independent candidate for President of the United States. I grew up in an America that seemed to have achieved its promise as an exemplary nation. Modern democracy had spread from one nation, ours, in 1776, to 6 by 1865, and to 190 by the 1960s. We had become the city on the hill. We were a moral authority around the globe. Our government, institutions, our Congress, the court, the regulatory agencies, and even the American press were renowned for their integrity, and they were revered worldwide. Other nations wanted our American leadership. They knew the difference between leadership and bullying, which is something our current leaders seem to have forgotten. We were the template of liberty, proof that for a country to thrive, its people must be free. Free to speak, free to worship, free to build great companies, free to start small businesses. We were the freest country in the world, and by no coincidence, also the most prosperous. Working Americans could provide for their families on a single salary. They could buy a home, raise a family, save for retirement without mountains of debt. We made the best music. We made the best movies. We made gold standard automobiles that everybody in the world wanted. We made blue jeans.
Which of the visions is he expressing here?
The way it used to be. He's that.
What is he saying there? I want this to go back. Is it restoration, fairness, national identity, technological abundance, or moral renewal?
Restoration.
I think what this is saying is go back to the way it was. It was all great, a sort of a restorationist view. I think that's very clearly what he's expressing here. Whether that's what he really believes, I don't know. I mean, I think, whoever wrote this script for him followed that line, and they thought that was a good line. I don't know how the Make America Healthy thing fits with that. If you think people were healthy before we discovered the measles vaccine or the polio vaccine, or, we really want to go back to that. I mean, I remember being, my parents being afraid to send me to the swimming pool because there was polio going around. I mean, it wasn't so great back then. I don't know that's really him. When you talk about what he's doing now and what's going on now, I think that's. But I think whoever prepared this, they're following very clearly that kind of a restorationist vision, and it's a powerful vision.
I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm running.
Skip ahead a bit here and see what it says.
Running as an independent candidate for President of the United States. I grew up in an America that seemed to have achieved its promise as an exemplary nation. Modern democracy had spread from one nation, ours, in 1776, to 6 by 1865, and to 190 by the 1960s. We had become the city on the hill. We were a moral authority around the globe. Our government, institutions, our Congress, the court, the regulatory agencies, and even the American press were renowned for their integrity, and they were revered worldwide. Other nations wanted our American leadership. They knew the difference between leadership and bullying, which is something our current leaders seem to have forgotten. We were the template of liberty, proof that for a country to thrive, its people must be free. Free to speak, free to worship, free to build great companies, free to start small businesses.
Nostalgia thing seems to have a certain appeal, and people just remember the good things. He's not talking about we were fighting a war in Vietnam and all the things that were going on at that time that were not so great. But that is presenting a vision. That's one vision that's out there, and I think that's a big part of Trump's vision is. We're going back. It's not just picking one. politicians put together their own assemblage from the various things that are out there. Some of them may be just thrust on one thing and they're just there, the politician for one thing, but a lot of them piece together in a creative sort of a way and put together their own mix and get them confused or join, like you saw with Martin Luther King. He put together the religious one with the social change and so on. So they're putting them together. That's what I want to talk about next time, is what's going on in the current scene, where the politicians are going, where they could go. If anybody has a particular one that they have in mind, prepare something, bring something, talk about it. I'll get something together. And that's what we'll be doing for the next class. That's all I have for today's class, unless somebody has something they want to bring up or any last remarks or comments. I don't hear any.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Let's see.